Hello and welcome to episode 9 of The Hex with myself, Armand Kafai. Armand, no John today. We're going to have to hold it down ourselves.
Yeah, we're gonna have to put the team on our back, carry the team, I guess. I mean, John left us.
We're going to have to carry the team. And before we carry the team with our six hottest topics in American soccer, guys, I always forget like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Please just give us a thumbs up. Please give us a subscribe. We grew by like 30% of our subscribers last week. If you like the show, if you're enjoying what we're doing, we're enjoying bringing it to you. Give us a subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, give us a 5-star rating. All of that really helps a ton with the YouTube algorithm, with the Spotify algorithm, if that exists. Just please give us a like and a subscribe and a comment. Let us know what you're thinking. We're hoping to make this more interactive over time. So, Armand, are we ready to get into it?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you guys like it, make sure to share it with your friends, share with whoever, share with your coworkers who you might think like soccer and actually they do, and you just haven't talked about them yet. So, yeah, I'm ready to dive right into the six hottest topics of the week. Let's go right into it.
Our first topic of the week, Armand, we open with possibly the most impressive result of the weekend. The LA Galaxy defeated Minnesota United 6-2 at Dignity Health Sports Park to advance to their first conference final since 2014. 10 years. Finish the sentence, Armand. The Galaxy's win was blank.
It was impressive.
Oh,
Genuinely,
wow.
what it
Great
was.
word.
I mean, I was gonna think of like an ass kicking or something, but is that two words technically? Ass kicking, I guess. So
Hyphenated.
hyphenated would be one. Look, I thought that this game would be a lot closer than it was, but the Galaxy, I mean, week after week, they've just been consistently just showing why they are the best team in the MLS playoffs left. Look, I mean, the dominant performance against Colorado, I mean, some people were like, okay, like maybe Colorado just kind of fizzled off. They weren't as good, whatever. No, the Galaxy have taken it to team after team with their performances and the triple P's. I mean, Pencil, Peck, Pooch, there's not enough words we can say about Ricky Pooch. And like you won't see on the goal sheet, oh, Ricky Pooch had, like any goals or anything, but his impact is so profound. On that first goal, Daniel, in the first minute of the game, that
Yeah.
ball, that outside of foot
Incredible.
pass to Gabriel Peck that sent him free. I mean, unreal performance from the Galaxy. And to do it in this fashion, I mean, I know we're like there's other teams that for example, Orlando played Atlanta, and they didn't win this dominating of a way. This is the most dominant performance of the playoffs that I think we've seen.
Where were they so dominant?
And it's just in the attack and the way that they want to play from what Greg Vanney and what I really admire about what Greg Vanney is going about is sometimes you see cagey affairs. Sometimes you see, just okay, we're gonna play a little conservatively in moments. But with what Greg Vanney says, we're gonna go attack. We're gonna go at you. We're
And we're
gonna
not
go
going to
attack,
stop.
and we're not gonna stop. And we're gonna have the ball. And for me, they were just relentless. They kept trying to isolate Peck on the wing and have him cook on the sides. They were, finding Ricky Pooch, who I think attempted like over 130 passes, which
Wow.
that's not a normal number. Like, let's
No,
just have it clear.
no.
That's not a normal number. You'd probably expect 90 to 100 range in the more normal
For the
range.
best midfielder, 75 to
Exactly.
80 for an average midfielder. Yeah.
Exactly. And he's putting up 130, progressing the ball up the pitch. Gabriel Peck, I mean, he was causing havoc on that side. I mean, was it Diaz who got sent off for two just challenges on Peck? Look, their attack is just so dominant, and that the way that they play with, you know, Edwin Cerrillo just being that one man manning the back. You have Marco Royce who's even putting a defensive shift. All in all, the entire team has bought in to what Greg Vanney has presented to the team, Daniel. And look, I think Minnesota, we were like, oh, it's gonna be a long day for them. Then Kelvin Yeboah had that absolute rip of a shot. But then after that, it just kind of was one way traffic.
Yeah, and we'll talk about Minnesota in a minute. But for me, to finish the sentence, the Galaxy's win was a changing of the guard. That's what I put. It's a changing of the guard in Los Angeles. And we'll talk about LAFC in a minute. But I think this was an incredibly significant weekend beyond just the result because we'll talk about the Seattle versus LA matchup. And I'm not sure LA is going to get past this next round, but this was the farthest they've gotten in 10 years. And I grew up in an MLS where the Galaxy were the unbeatable team
Same,
and
same.
they were the one the big dog that everyone was scared to play, and that hasn't been the case for a decade. But it also shows me that spending gets you somewhere. And let's
Yep.
not act like this is a team that just has been growing for years and they've been building up to this moment. No, they went and spent $20 million in this offseason. But they spent correctly. The players that they got stepped up at the biggest moments. And I think that was the theme of the entire MLS playoffs this weekend was the teams that had their stars step up are advancing and they are still playing. Uh, let's talk about Minnesota United for just a second, Armand, because for me, I mean, we're going to have more time to see the Galaxy. They didn't miss a beat. 15 goals in their 3 games. You mentioned Colorado. They scored 15 goals in the playoffs in 3 games. There was a little bit of worry that there was going to be rust. No. But for me, this one result in a vacuum was as much about the naivety of Eric Ramsey as it was the Galaxy, beating them down because he was exposed for what he was, a 32-year-old head coach, quite a bit younger than me. When the lineup came out, we were expecting soccer terrorism from Minnesota United, but that's not what we saw, was it?
No, not at all. I mean, they played a little bit. I mean, look, when the goal happened the first minute, things kind of changed. But when Kelvin Yeboah comes back in the 6th minute and scores make it one
You
one,
think it's going to
look
reset? You think it's going to
exactly. And
reset?
and I know we're going to talk about this, but look what Brian Schmetzer did with LA against LAFC. They mucked up the game. Minnesota tried to muck up the
They
game,
couldn't.
but they couldn't, and they were just instead they're just fouling in bad places. They when you want to muck up a game, you'd like to do it farther up the pitch than in your own third. And we saw, I think it was the second goal, which came from a free kick that they drew. Boom, right ahead, Dejan Joveljic, goal. Like you can't do that against teams like the Galaxy. You got to muck it up in other places. You can't just foul and have really dangerous
With the
set
best
pieces in
set
those
piece
areas.
taker in the league.
Exactly. You can't do that. And I mean, they even had a penalty which Dane Sinclair saved late on, but they play just. I think. Look, we want to see free flowing football, right? But there's some times where you have to sit there and kind of be a little bit more compact, a little bit more structured, like we've seen other teams do. And Minnesota, like you said, didn't do that. They kind of just were like, it almost felt like they were kind of happy to be there, for lack
A
of a
little bit.
better word. Uh, and also keep in mind they didn't win a game in the first round, so I mean, like it didn't. It just kind of seemed like okay, we're just gonna go and see whatever. They had no resistance to the Galaxy. I mean, if you include the penalty, the Galaxy had 4.22 expected goals. Like that's a pretty ridiculous number.
The Galaxy had the top 9 chances in the game, not counting penalties. The top 9 chances.
Yep.
It was a beatdown. And the only other thing I will say about Minnesota United, they deserve a lot of credit. I think Eric Ramsey deserves a lot of credit for the season they've had. I think they performed above expectations overall. This was a naive performance and a learning performance from them against a team that's veteran. And it's going to be really interesting to see if the Galaxy can keep it going. They're going to have a much different opponent in the next round.
Much different.
Moving on to the next round, on the other side of the City of Angels, LAFC eliminated 2-1 in extra time by the Seattle Sounders late into the night on Saturday night. After midnight, the cars had already started going in Vegas as we kind of had the dual screen go and the Formula One cars. This is the first time in 3 years that LAFC has been eliminated before MLS Cup, and it ends a season that saw LAFC win the Open Cup, make this the finals of the League Cup, but obviously fall in the earliest they've been in the MLS Cup playoffs in quite a few years. So we're going to play Finish the Sentence again, and I'll take it this time. Finish the sentence for LAFC. This result shows they have to move on from Olivier Giroud, and they need to move on quickly. That's exactly what I will say about this performance. I don't think you can look at this LAFC team and say that a lot is wrong. They got past Vancouver relatively simply. They rode their luck. They could have beaten Seattle, no doubt, on Saturday night. But this is a team that in their player acquisitions, which they have been among the best at in MLS over the last few years, they do a really good job of failing quickly, Armand. When something doesn't work, unlike some teams we've seen, they move on quickly. They get that player out
Yep.
and they get someone else in. I think at this point, Olivier Giroud, I may take some flack for this, but he's becoming one of the biggest flops in MLS history. I'm sorry. Everything we look at, he hasn't scored in 14 games in MLS play. He still has yet to score for them. But not only that, he has 1.6 XG combined in 14 games. He did not have a shot on target. He had the fewest touches of any starter on the field on Saturday night, and he completed 10 passes in 69 minutes. That is not good enough for how LAFC wants to play, and an LAFC team that this is the expectation. It is very, very high when you sign players like this. It is very, very high, and I don't think Olivier Giroud fits as they thought he would. Armand, what do you take away from this game?
So I guess finish the sentence with LAFC. What was the sentence again?
This result for LAFC shows.
This result for LAFC shows Steve Cherundolo is not the guy right now. And look, I was a big fan of Cherundolo and how he plays, but you just see it time after time in these knockout competitions. He just doesn't adjust.
But they did win the Open Cup, and
they won the
competitions. They made the final of the Leagues Cup.
They won but they haven't won. They haven't won the big ones. They haven't won the Leagues Cup. They
what haven't. If Gareth Bale didn't score that goal against Philadelphia?
Exactly. They didn't win Leagues Cup. They didn't. They actually fell in MLS Cup last year. There's moments where when things are going, Cherundolo just doesn't adjust. And there's just times where, it just wasn't working for LAFC, and Seattle out of possession would be structured in a way to where preventing guys like Boanga, preventing guys like, for example, Giroud. I mean, Giroud is a direct. I would say Giroud is a direct, what's the word for it? He needs guys like Boanga, Bogusz to produce for him. Giroud's not going to produce on his own. He's going to sit in the box, look for moments, and do. And once you prevent those guys from getting to those points, then Giroud's rendered useless.
But then why did they sign him in the first place? I wonder who signed that deal. Was this signed for? Obviously, it wasn't just signed for marketing reasons, but it doesn't seem like he fits at all with what they're trying to do.
It doesn't. And I mean, we mentioned on the show a couple of weeks ago. It seems like they were better off when they were playing Kai Kamara up there.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, a very interesting contrast because you see Kai Kamara's activities a lot more than Olivier Giroud's. Look, and we can go back and forth on LAFC. To me, it just doesn't seem like a team that had much solutions. And yes, I know Stefan Frei had an amazing game, right? But if you look at their expected goals throughout in this match, 1.91 on 27 shots.
That's not good.
That's horrible. That's almost 0.05 expected goals per shot. Now, their expected goals on target were a little bit different, but wow, you're getting shots that are low quality on the field, but your players just turning them into really quality shots. Like that's what 1.91 expected goals in 27 shots is terrible, like flat out. And Seattle did exactly what they need to do against LAFC. But how many times have we seen LAFC run into this problem where they don't produce the quality chances in the big moments? I feel like we talked about this in Leagues Cup. I feel like we've talked about this in other matches as well, where we're kind of concerned about LAFC and that weird run they had with injuries and a lot of match congestion. But they just kind of try to keep going along the same way they do. And kind of like we talked about, like that big Galaxy win, the El Tráfico, the Galaxy just punched them in the mouth and they were never able to recover. And it almost seemed like that was the case in this match as well too.
If you put Antoine Griezmann, though, at that number 9 role, I think they could get pretty good pretty quick, don't you think?
Yeah, but would they do that?
Of course. That's why I say, number one, they need to move on from Olivier Giroud, and they need to do it now and admit their mistakes.
But how realistic do you think that is that they move on from Giroud?
It's not, because his contract is through the end of next year. Now, we don't know the numbers, but this is an LAFC team. They can do whatever they want. They could buy him out if they want. The only other thing I'll mention on LAFC, because we need to move to Seattle, is the signs were there that they are not an elite team this year, because the teams that they beat in the run into the end of the season, St. Louis, Sporting, they beat Vancouver and San Jose. They were not beating the cream of the crop in MLS. However, we do have to give a lot of props to the Seattle Sounders. To me, if we finish the sentence on Seattle, they reminded everyone that they are still a big dog in MLS. And it's kind of like people forget about this team because they are just this veteran team that's always in the mix, but they haven't really done it recently. It reminded you of a few things, but mainly the importance of a great defense in the playoffs, and the defense includes the goalkeeper, Stefan Frei, possibly the best goalkeeper of the last decade in MLS, right?
Oh, 100%. I mean, if I were to finish a sentence, it would have to be Schmetzer is still one of the playoff kings when it comes to coaching. Because look, and I kind of wrote about it on Back Heel. What you got is exactly what you expected from Seattle. they're not going to produce that many moments in offense, but they're going to, like we kind of talked about what Minnesota couldn't do, muck up the
Exactly.
game. They're going
Exactly.
when LAFC was trying to get in transition, you would see Seattle players run back or be in the correct positions to prevent guys like Boanga getting those transition moments, because that's where LAFC creates their chances. Now we cannot like not talk about Stephen Fry, right? Like, look, I'm looking at FOTMob right now. He faced 2.87 expected goals on target. They only allowed one. He basically prevented 2 goals, essentially, from the numbers. He had an absolutely outstanding performance in goal. And it's almost like in hockey, Daniel, when you ride the hot goaltender, right? Like a lot of hockey teams ride the hot goaltender at his moments, and a team like Seattle, they know they can do it with Fry. I mean, Fry, when we can talk about what was it, 2016, we made that huge save on Josie Altidore in MLS Cup,
8 years
on
ago.
that header, deep cut. I know,
Eight
but
years ago. Wow.
8 years ago, and it's crazy because things just don't change. Death, taxes, and under Schmetzer, look, I think it was 13, 14 playoff games in the years under Schmetzer, they've averaged less than one expected goal in away games, but defensively they just make teams struggle so much that
And they
all
have
they need is one or two chances.
And they have Obed Vargas. You mentioned that midfield and mucking things up. They have Obed Vargas, the young guy, and they have Christian Roldan, the old guy. He's not old, but the veteran, to know exactly where they need to be to stop those. We'll talk about the Western Conference final matchup, but boy, it is a contrast of styles, and it's going to be fascinating.
It's gonna be great, man.
Moving to the East, Orlando City. They earned a 1-0 win over Atlanta United. They ended the Cinderella run for the team from the A, advancing to their first conference championship in franchise history. They will host the New York Red Bulls next week with a spot in MLS Cup on the line. We're going to play Finish the Sentence again, and I will take this one. Again, finish the sentence. This win showed us for Orlando that Oscar Pareja is one of the top echelon coaches in MLS, and he is arguably one of the best MLS coaches of all time. Uh, you mentioned, again, we look at Minnesota United and how naive they went into that match. It just feels like Orlando City knows exactly what they need to do to win in every game that they need to win in these knockout rounds. And Oscar Pareja's 5 years in a row now that he has taken Orlando City to the playoffs. They had not made the playoffs in franchise history, and now they have gone in 5 years. Look at what happened to Dallas after he left. Obviously, Dallas has not, they finished top of the table 2 years in a row, won the Supporter Shield. They haven't really sniffed that since. This is a guy who knows how to win in this league. He deserves all the credit in the world, and he's built a year in and year out contender. And against Atlanta, we'll talk about Atlanta United in a second, but they just did exactly what they had to do. They knew exactly what they had to do. They didn't overextend themselves. I don't think this was a situation like the Galaxy where, okay, we're up 1-0. Let's make it 2-3-4. We're not really afraid of the opposition. We saw against Miami how many times Atlanta was hitting them on the counter, how Saba and Moranchuk, they've got players that can score. But if you just kind of know exactly what you're doing, manage the game, Atlanta didn't really show a whole lot, Armand.
No, and to finish a sentence, I think for Orlando City, this victory was almost routine. They just
Yeah.
took care of business. Look, with Atlanta, they were down also 2 forwards. Like they had the injuries to their guys, and that made things a lot more difficult. But it seemed like Orlando was just getting the bulk of the opportunities. They're just seeing out the result. They just did the things. Because I would say like in the first half, it was just kind of back and forth. Like there was some spells like in the second half, especially where Atlanta United had some, I would say, good spells of possession, but nothing to where you were like, okay, these guys are threatening. Like, and you see it in expected goals numbers, right? Point
Had
three
nothing.
expected goals for Atlanta. There was nothing threatening for Orlando. You saw the glimpses of what they could do in transition. You saw how the guys like Ramiro Enrique, like Torres, etc., can expose those moments. You saw guys like can go on and on. Duncan McGuire come off the bench and just keep that
Muriel,
thing. Like
yeah.
you just keep going down with their depth on their bench. But for me, it was routine. I wasn't like I said, it wasn't the most impressive result of the thing, but it's look,
It didn't
we're not
have to
looking like
be.
it doesn't have to be exactly. It's just about hey, we need to survive and advance and move on to the next round. And Orlando City did what they had to do to stop Atlanta United. And I mean, to kind of transition to Atlanta United, Daniel, I'll be honest, I'm pretty disappointed by the way they played.
It was
It didn't
expected,
seem
man.
like
It was expected. I think this
it
was
didn't
not
seem like
surprising.
they were. But look, you're down 1-0, and that's all you produce. Even in those late moments, there was no urgency. All they were doing was trying to go through Saba and try to find a ball into the box. You never felt like Moranchuk was even threatening in those moments. It felt really just like they weren't even taking a risk. Like, for example, Minnesota. I mean, again, I know we keep going back to them. They took a risk late on and they got punished for it. But look, you're the 9 seed. You have nothing to lose. Nothing. Go for it a little bit, in my opinion. And to be honest, I was pretty disappointed by what we saw from Atlanta. But for Orlando, they also did the job that they needed to do.
Well, and the if we were going to play finish the sentence for Atlanta, I think this win or this result shows that Valentino
I was gonna say the
should
same
not be
thing.
the manager.
Yep.
Like respect to him, he's done a great job. He deserves a lead assistant role wherever it is. It's clear he's a bright soccer mind. I'm not sure that this is really something. This may be a little bit too far. And this is why when I said on the first show before the playoffs, there was one team that Minnesota or that Miami did not want to face, and it was Atlanta United. This is the reason why, because they knew Miami better than anyone else, and they were able to expose Miami and their flaws. The difference between Orlando and Miami is that while Miami has an incredibly high ceiling, their floor can be very low, and they had holes all over their roster,
Right.
all over that lineup. Orlando doesn't have holes on their lineup. They don't have that Messi, obviously, who does, but they don't have the Messi, the Suarez. But they are just very good in every spot. You look at every single spot on the field. Where is the weakness for them? There's not one. They don't have a weakness at center back. Their outside backs are good. They've got fringe national teamers at D mid, and then you've got like Facundo Torres, Ramiro Enrique, guys that are scoring goals for fun. There's just no real weakness there. So we'll see if Orlando can keep it going. It's going to be a pretty fascinating finish there. And you want to say one other thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I'm looking at their bench right now, like just to remind myself, Duncan McGuire off the bench, Luis Muriel off the
Yeah.
bench, got Kyle Smith who started multiple games off the bench, Nicolas Lodero off the
Off the
bench. You can bring on so much things in games, and that's in games that need that stuff, but they didn't need it in this match. And one final thing I like to say, Daniel. I mean, shout out to Dax McCarty because he had a fantastic career. It seems like this is his last game as a result. And I mean, you saw him. I think you were at Dallas or near Dallas
Yep,
when
yep, yep. Oh,
he
I've seen him.
played
Yeah.
at Dallas. So I mean, shout out to him and his career.
Yeah, and I do want to mention exactly what you said about the depth for a second, because I think that is another credit to Luis Muzi and what he's done. Another guy who was in Dallas, who was part of the team that built that FC Dallas team that became the best team in the league, and they just kind of let them all go. Uh, Even a guy like David Brecalo, they're bringing him off the bench. That's a Slovenian international in Dallas. They did the exact same thing. You mentioned Nicolas Lodero. Who was the Nicolas Lodero of FC Dallas in 2016? Mauro Rosales. The exact same thing. A former Sounders attacking mid. They go and make a really smart signing to bring a guy like that as a veteran presence in the locker room. I think Orlando City is built to win, and we'll talk about the Eastern Conference preview in a minute. Finally, in the East, the fourth matchup and the first one that was actually played on a Saturday afternoon. New York Red Bulls saw two early goals lead them to a 2-0 win over NYCFC at Citi Field, winning the Hudson River Derby, advancing the Red Bulls to the conference finals. The team that led or was one of the top teams in MLS for expected goal difference over the season. Armand, finish the sentence. This result showed us blank.
This result showed us that New York is red. But on the real, it showed a very mature, strong performance from the Red Bulls. And for NYCFC, again, just they can't get out of they struggled. They really struggled. And you might look at the expected goals and be like, what? But it's 2.8 to 0.88, Armand. Like, what do you mean they struggled? They produced 2.8 expected goals. Carlos Cornell to make big saves, whatever. Game state matters, right? And in that moment, a lot of those chances came after it was 2-0 already with the Red Bulls. Look, what the Red Bulls did was they said, we're gonna make life difficult for you. We're gonna make things a lot more uncomfortable for you. One guy that I was referencing is Keaton Parks. On average, right? His now your expected pass numbers is what you expected to complete, and that's a better measure than pass accuracy. But look, they're very closely, almost like 1-to-1 in some moments, etc. His pass accuracy is around 80-81% on the year. It was 40% in the first half. They made his life difficult by pressing. They made it difficult by pressing and making it a Red Bull game. The game was open. There was transition moments for both sides. But for Red Bull, I mean, they just were able to get the job done. And it's just another good, mature performance. And it's why I think Red Bull is the one of the better teams left in. I mean, clearly, the last
There's
four
only
teams
four
left.
teams left.
But look, Emil Forsberg, he's such a good, just experienced, wily vet that you're paying big money for. And there was a moment in the game where he just slowed up a counterattack and wait for players to come, and then boom, was able to produce a moment. I mean, for me, Daniel, it was a very, very impressive victory for the Red Bulls. And it shows that, hey, like they're for real. And that matchup next week is going to be very interesting.
To me, if we're going to finish the sentence, this result shows that expected goal difference is unbeaten as a predictor of success, right? At the end of
Yes.
the day,
I mean, over the course of a season, yes.
over the course of a season, because people are the listeners we have to this show are probably tired of hearing me talk about this. But the Red Bulls had the second best expected goal difference in the Eastern Conference behind only Columbus, even though they only won 11 out of their 34 games. They only lost 9 out of their 34 games. And they had a lot of results that probably should have been wins that were draws. And if you added another 10 to 15 points to what they had, that would have put them right at the top of the Eastern Conference. And all of the predictors showed that they are one of the best teams in the league, even though their results have been very, very strange, even leading up to the playoffs. They were not playing
Mm-hmm.
well. They lost to Atlanta. They lost 5-1 to NYCFC about a month and a half ago. They were not getting wins. Like I'm looking, and they had won basically 2 games since June, but the expected goals told a different story. And that's one thing you have to look at when the games get to win or go home, because we all know in MLS, the regular season, sometimes let's just say people don't care that much about the results. And I thought there was a little bit of poetic justice in the Red Bulls beating NYCFC in a match that they, on the expected goals number, were pretty much dominated on, even though they did dominate the game, because that's the opposite of how their games have been going this year, where they've been
Yeah,
dominating the
exactly.
expected
The
goals.
variance coming in the playoffs is honestly very funny. And it's also why you continuously play guys like Dante Van Zier, right? His expected goals numbers have always been consistently high. He hasn't been producing the goals, but a lot of the theory behind expected goals is you're going to keep playing the guy who gets in those right moments. Eventually, those goals are going to come.
What did we say about Olivier Giroud? He's not getting in those moments. He's not getting the
Exactly.
expected goals. He's not creating them. And then it shows up in the biggest moments where you're playing teams that are watching you and preparing for one game and totally locked in. The only other thing I wanted to mention is that this also shows under the radar moves in the summer can make big impacts on teams. And look at the signing that the Red Bulls made over the summer, Felipe Carballo, who scored the banger goal to
Yep.
take them. And when Red Bull scored first, you always knew this is probably, if they score first, they're probably going to see this result out. NYCFC is not a team built to chase a
Yep.
deficit. They're built to hold on to a lead. And he scored a great goal. This is a guy who was on the fringe Uruguay national team, moved to Brazil, didn't really work out for him in Brazil, and they got him on loan, kind of off the scrap heap, and he scored in 2 out of the 3 playoff games. He's been fantastic for them. So kudos to the Red Bulls. Maybe it was Jurgen Klopp as the new director of football. Maybe he had already had his eye on them, but those moves can make big, big impacts.
No, exactly, Daniel. They can do absolutely big things. On the flip side, for NYCFC, I mean, all you can probably say for them is damn. Like it's just
But
it's
that's
it's
them
it's
every
it's
year. This is
it's every
NYCFC
year.
every year. They're always kind of in
Exactly.
it. You don't really know, and they're kind of hoping to ride their luck. They're never great. They're never bad, but these results happen for
Yeah.
them.
And Matt Doyle brought up a great point where they spent big money on a bunch of signings who made quite literally almost, I think, no impact. I think Agustino Heda, Julian Fernandez. I mean, these guys were big signings in the before the season started, and they produced to do nothing in the times when games matter. And look, I thought it was pretty funny at the end of the game how Tolkien was egging on the crowd, and Maxi Morales
I
came and
like
just gave him a
Tolkien.
fat shove and all that stuff. And it was like, all right, man, you lost. Like, it's okay. Like, just you gotta let it go. But for
That's what you got to
NYCFC,
do in a rivalry game, though. Come on, like that's
exactly.
what you got to do.
You gotta do a little bit of the antics. But for NYCFC, I think it's a very disappointing result for them. But I think it shows for the Red Bulls, Sandro Schwartz has so much experience that Nalapil talked about. He coached at Mainz, coached at Dynamo, I think Kiev. Uh, he has experience at Hertha BSC, I think as well too. He has experience coaching in big time matches, and we're starting to see that with the way the Red Bulls are playing. And look, I'm very impressed by how the Red Bulls play. Carlos Coronel was absolutely fantastic. Saved 2 goals above expected. Again, riding the hot goalkeeper hand like we talked about in that LAFC Seattle game, but with a 2 goal cushion versus a much more closely affair. So, Daniel, for me, again, very impressed with what we saw in the Hudson River Derby, and uh, I was just really it's just
We'll
so
get into
funny.
predictions in a minute.
No, but it's just so funny to me how some people like how the beginning of the year, the playoffs. Oh, this is gonna be a difficult season for Red Bull. Like this was a difficult season, disappointing. To now they're 1 win away from MLS Cup. Like that's just crazy to me, and that just shows the unpredictability of our beautiful league.
Is it unpredictable though? Not if you go by the expected goal difference
Oh man,
predictor.
here we go. Statman taking my glory.
Another week of the coaching carousel in MLS, and another player, former player, is on the carousel now, and someone is thrown off the carousel as well. Just minutes before we started taping, the news broke on that one. But let's first get into the big news in Miami. We thought it was going to be one of Messi's buddies that would be hired as the manager, who has actually managed a professional team before. It was not. The new manager in Miami is going to be Javier Mascherano, one of his Argentina national team teammates. He will be the newest manager of Inter Miami after coaching the Argentina Olympic squad. He's coached their U20s, and he's going to be taking over in Miami. What is your initial reaction to this, Armand?
Kind of just like I I'm not necessarily sold on this is like the best like coach that they could have signed for this role.
But
Again, like the whole
that's not the question. It's kind of like what we talked about last week, though. It's not going to be
yeah
the best coach. It's going to be
yeah, but I don't
just a
know if
very
he's I
unique
don't even think he's
situation.
I don't know if he's gonna be the best guy like for the situation. I mean, it's like you're just gonna hire like your buddy. It's like the Lakers hiring JJ Redick. Like I
Which has been
mean, to
going
be
very
honest,
well.
I was gonna say that's going better for them, but that's what it kind of felt like, and that's I guess I have the same reaction going into it. Is I'm not exactly sure like this is exactly like what they need. Again, you need guys to manage these personalities. You need more of a guy to manage the personalities versus manage the tactics. It's kind of like that new
I
age NBA
guess.
thing
I don't know
where
about that
it's
though, man. Look at what happened in the playoffs, though.
yeah,
This is a
exactly. That's
one-off
what I was
thing.
about to
You
get
do
to.
need to
Like,
have people who can do tactics.
no, that's what I was about to get into. But like, I'm not sold on it, Daniel. I'm really not sold on this hire of a not so great U20 national team coach, essentially as your MLS coach. If we're gonna boil it down,
So
I
this is
know
there's going to be
he's
two MLS teams with that with a coach of that pedigree next year of that resume
who was the other one?
joining the Western Conference in San Diego.
Oh yeah, you're right. The Mikey Varas signing of them all. No,
I
but
think, by the way, let me say, I'm not saying Mikey Varas was a bad U20. I'm not saying he's not so great. I'm just saying there's going to be two teams in MLS next year that are basically hiring coaches from coaching a youth national team.
yeah, exactly. So I mean, are you sold on it, Daniel? I feel
No,
like
absolutely not. But here, okay, so here's the questions in my head. One, do you trust Messi? Do you trust Messi that he's played with this guy? He's going to know this guy's not an idiot. He's going to know that he knows his football. So if that's the case, he wouldn't have
do
vouched for
you
him because
trust
I think
Messi? Because
I
I
do.
don't know if I do.
Well, it's kind of like, do you trust LeBron? Like it's the same thing where
Like you kind of have to trust them almost.
they have very similar resumes to what they do, right? Like they've won everything. They are arguably the best of all time at what they did, and they're kind of hiring their buddies to be the coach. But like we said, it's worked out for the Lakers at least early. And this is a question of I think that Mascherano will be fine from the on-field tactic side for most games. I don't think that that's going to be an issue. I think where it's going to come into play is when you get into the playoff situations. And like we were talking about before, not so much. We were talking about this with me, you, and John on text. not so much like how is Javier Mascherano going to coach, but who is running the soccer operations now in Miami? Because they hired this guy, Raul Sanelli or something like that, who is overseeing everything now, and he's overseeing Chris Henderson. And Chris Henderson, to me, is one of the best soccer
I mean,
executives that
he built that team right now to
he
be
built
roster
that
compliant.
team, and the team is always the talent has to be there. And Mascherano can probably be fine as long as they have a talent gap over all these other teams. Now it does show in the playoffs, but that's the biggest question is Chris Henderson going to make it through the offseason? Is he still going to be there? Who is running these things? If it's the same people, it'll probably be fine. Do I think there could have been better choices? Yeah, absolutely. But I trust Messi that he's going to say, yes, this guy knows what he's talking about, and he's going to be a good coach. And of course, if you're a young player, Javier Mascherano, I mean, that's one of the all-time greats of the last 15, 20 years. So, you're going to respect what he says.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I'm not exactly sold on the idea of Mascherano. I can get why it was done, but I'm not, in my eyes, I'm not sold on it. And to trust Messi, I mean, to be honest, I think from what a lot of people have kind of reported, that Chris Henderson probably might be out the door.
Do you think so?
But that's what there's been kind of rumblings from, I think, guys like Bogert, guys like Doyle got mentioned on social media about how this guy has come above Henderson.
To
I
me,
could
that
see
would
a
be a
world.
much bigger deal.
I could see a world where Chris Henderson is not there. And I mean, look, Miami has become across the organization Messi and friends, like across the entire org, and whether that's for better or for worse, we will see how they can deal with the MLS roster limitations and the rules and how they exist. But for me, I don't know, man. Just I have no
Solid
positive or
podcast,
yeah.
solid podcast analysis. I don't know, man.
Yeah,
For
I
me,
don't
I don't
know,
know,
man.
man.
I think like
You're really cooking. Well, there is another manager that has been let go from MLS. That this only came out about what half hour before we were
yeah,
recording. So just very initial thoughts here. Vanni Sartini is out as Vancouver Whitecaps manager. He had a couple of years there where he took them to the playoffs 2 years in a row. They did not get past the first round of the playoffs. They have won the Canadian Championship 3 years in a row, which does matter for them. Obviously, that can't be discounted, but he was a bit of a firebrand. He would say some crazy things. I think we all loved him, Armand. I don't, just initial thoughts here. I don't like this move for Vancouver. I think he deserved another year.
I don't like it either because they brought in this DP Stuart Armstrong for
Mhm.
what 3 months. So Sartini got
And
three
they were
months of this
good.
guy,
And
and
they
they
were
were
good.
good. So they got 3 months of this guy. You're not gonna give him now. Maybe he wanted to leave, but you're not gonna give him like more time with this DP that you brought in the summer. That to me is a bit bizarre. And I think overall, like Sartini's done a good job with the roster that he's been given. And
Absolutely.
I think the more important thing is, and I think a lot of people kind of discount this. Look, when you're supporting a team as a supporter, as a fan, as whatever, it's a lot more easier when your manager
The grass isn't always
embraces a
greener.
city. Yes, and
Grass isn't
look,
always greener.
Vanny embraced Vancouver, embraced everything, had him play a fun style of football in moments, tried out different shit, for lack of a better word. And his reward was you get a DP for like a couple of months and then we're letting you go. To me, that's not right. I mean, they pushed LAFC to 3 games. Like, what else do you expect? And you could argue that they had really great performances in those 3 games. Like, I don't see it, Daniel. I don't get why this is the case. And maybe Vancouver knows something, but again, like if I was an MLS team with a vacancy, I'd be banging down the doors. But I don't think there's that many left, to be honest with you. So
Yeah, I don't know if he was kind of uniquely positioned for that role. I don't know if he's going to get another job elsewhere, but you
he
look at
basically
the
made
result.
himself coach, right? For like, look, think about it. Like when he was a
For lack of a better term, but
yeah,
didn't I feel like also they changed their sporting director recently. Maybe this writing was on the wall. He's the kind of guy that maybe he just decided, hey, I don't want to
yeah,
deal with this anymore. Who knows? But you look at the Whitecap season again, and they had a very good expected goal difference. They outside. I mean, I think the question is, what are your expectations at the Vancouver Whitecaps?
exactly.
Because if you're expecting to be on that next tier below LAFC, the Sounders, and the Galaxy, I think they were. So you're kind of looking at this saying, okay, well, what do you expect? You won the Canadian Championship 3 years in a row. Little bit of a tough fan for him, but of course, we wish him all the best. Last segment of the show, Armand, we get into predictions, and I'm a little bit bummed that John is not here, although he would probably be crowing a little bit about, although he predicted Trafico. I'm the only one that predicted Seattle to beat the Galaxy last week. So I think I had that exactly correct. I think I said Orlando, New York Red Bulls as well, right? So I think I got all four of those correct. Uh, your predictions have been pretty mediocre these playoffs, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean the playoffs have been pretty, what's it called?
Don't say
All
mediocre.
all over the place.
All
I mean
over the
they've been kind of
place.
mediocre in some of the games, man.
Well, Eastern Conference Finals first. Orlando hosting the
Oh,
New
we're gonna
York
dip,
Red Bulls.
we're gonna differ against this for sure.
This is a fascinating one, man. This is probably, I mean, both games are fascinating, to me, these are a playoffs. These are conference finals for the MLS junkie. This isn't for the newly found MLS fans. These are for the people who have been watching a lot that know Orlando has been one of the best teams in the league over the last 5 years, and the Red Bulls were under the radar quietly one of the better teams in MLS and a very tactically composed team. So Orlando versus Red Bulls, and what I'm looking for is to me, this one is going to be very low scoring. I think it could be nil-nil because you have two of the better tactical teams in the league, right? And teams that don't have a lot of holes, where maybe Orlando was able to expose their opponents a little bit more. They were able to expose Atlanta a lot. The Red Bulls have been playing very good, and the Red Bulls can score goals much better than Charlotte or Atlanta can. My heart says Orlando, but my head says the Red Bulls are going to win this one 2-1. Armand, what are you looking at?
This game, I'm very interested to see how Red Bull set up. I think we know how Orlando is going to set up.
Yeah.
I think we know how they play at home. I think you know how they're going to attack. They're going to turn as transition moments, etc. Sandro Schwartz sometimes kind of has like some tricks up his sleeve, and we saw in that first leg against in that first match against Columbus, they weren't pressing as much,
Yeah,
you
they
know,
switched it up.
compared. But then we saw in game two, they started pressing. Then we saw against New York City, they pressed. So what are they going to do against Orlando? I wish we had a little bit more time to look into the old games, but my guess is I don't think that they're going to press as much because that's where Orlando kind of thrives. Orlando thrives in those transition moments to be able to attack through guys like we mentioned, like Angulo, like Enrique, like Facundo
Torres.
Torres. These are the guys they thrive in transition. Does Red Bull want that, or are they going to sit and be more compact and then try to go attack in transition in their own way through Lewis Morgan, through Forsberg, through a Dante Van Zier, etc. Have Edelman maybe recover some balls and look to ping things a little bit more direct, a little bit more forward, but not press as much. This to me, Daniel, is one of the more fascinating games that we'll see just because what's Red Bull going to do and how's that going to impact the game? I think we're not exactly tactically sure what's going to happen,
So what's your
but
prediction?
I I'm getting there. I'm getting there. You're being a little impatient right now. I think Red Bulls are going to win 2-0. I think it's going to be it'll be 1-0 for a bit and Orlando will push numbers forward and Oscar Pareja showing he's not afraid to be aggressive when he needs to be, which is fantastic. And I think Red Bull will get one more on the counter to call it a day. And I think we'll see them in MLS Cup, which is I would be very I can't believe that. Like if you go back 2 months ago.
Typically, it's going to come down to set pieces, isn't it? I mean, we saw that for Orlando in the last round against Atlanta, which I still feel like Orlando, however they got the goal, if they hadn't gotten one, they would have gotten it eventually. But they beat them on a set piece. And to me, this is all going to come down to set pieces. Can someone score from a corner? Don't give up stupid set pieces. That's going to be the key. But we're both picking the New York Red Bulls to advance. And then in the Western Conference, the more star-studded matchup of the two, it is the LA Galaxy hosting the Seattle Sounders. Armand, this is a Seattle team that allowed the fewest expected goals on the road this year against an LA Galaxy team that scored the most expected goals at home this year. Who is going to advance to host MLS Cup?
How's that saying go when like an immovable object hits a how does that go? Like
The
I can't remember.
irresistible force meets the immovable object.
Yeah, immovable object. That's what we're getting. That's what we're getting, which is the most exciting thing about this.
This is not Minnesota
This
or
that
Colorado. This is
that's why you kind of saw me just like
you have to
sigh
throw
and
out what has happened in the
yeah,
last couple
that's why
weeks.
you just kind of saw me sigh because my I the Galaxy are such a fun team to watch, but I think Seattle does it, man. I think Seattle does it because look, the Galaxy have vulnerabilities. It's in defense.
Big time.
We and I don't think a coach like Eric Ramsey exposed that well. I don't think a coach like Chris Armas could even do that at all. But who can do that? Brian Schmetzer. Brian Schmetzer is a wizard when it comes to these things and getting Seattle, a team that maybe shouldn't have gone to MLS Cup in some years, to MLS Cup and winning it. I think Seattle through guys like Jordan Morris, like Roldan. I can go on and on. Paul Rothrock is back. If Nuhu's back,
They
which I
need
think
him back.
Nuhu's if they're all back, we're talking about a revitalized team. I just for me, I see Seattle mucking up the game. I know I've kept mentioning that quite a bit, but I can see them making the game kind of choppy, but in more intelligent ways than what Minnesota did. Uh, I see them trying to limiting those moments. I see a game where this game may not be as fun as people want it to be. I think it's going to be a much more structured approach from Seattle and the Galaxy trying to get through that structured approach. But I think the wily old fox and Brian Schmetzer and co does it again. I think they squeak out I would say, a 1-0 victory as a result.
What I need to see from this, and I'm on the same page as you, as it stands right now, if Rothrock plays, if Nuhu plays, I'm going to say it's a 1-1 final and Seattle wins on penalties to advance to MLS Cup where they would host. The big question here is the health of Yamar, because Yamar went off with that uh, hamstring injury after about an hour. And if LAFC had started Kamara and brought Giroud off the bench rather than the other way around, I think they may have been able to win that game. I think that was a tactical error on their part, especially given the injury. If Seattle has their full back line, I think they're going to do enough to hold the Galaxy off, and the Galaxy will get just a little bit naive in terms of they'll go forward a little bit too much and buy into
Yep,
their own hype just a
exactly.
little bit too much and say, oh, it always worked against Minnesota and it always worked against Colorado when Seattle is not the same. If there is no Yamar, that could really hurt the Seattle Sounders. And how funny is it, by the way, to mention players? And this is a credit to the Sounders organization and the culture that they've created. That we're talking about guys like Paul Rothrock as like key pieces. These are
Impact
guys that were
players,
nobody
yes.
that they have developed. And one other guy I want to mention there is Jackson Reagan. This is the guy who has. Tell me this. Is there not a little bit of Matt Hedges and Jackson Reagan?
There
Like
is.
a
There
guy
is.
who played 4 years in college, was a little bit unheralded at the start. The Sounders traded. Do you remember the Fire drafted him? The Sounders traded a third-round draft pick for this guy a couple years ago. He's 26, probably not a ceiling that's going to get him like onto the national team, but he's probably going to be one of the best defenders in MLS for the next 5 or 6, 7 years. There's a lot of Matt Hedges and Jackson Reagan, but if you ask me, yes, I think MLS Cup right now as it stands, Seattle Sounders versus New York
Wow, we
Red Bulls.
agree. Heartbreaking.
Love it. Love it. Well, that's
Yeah,
going to do it for the show this week. Thanks for listening to The Hex, and we will be back next week.